Guten Tag. Welcome to Neubauer News. I'm your host, Luisa Neubauer, a climate activist. Today, we have some special guests with us. Firstly, Annalena Baerbock, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and co-leader of the Green Party. Secondly, Hildegard Bentley, member of the European Parliament. And finally, Professor Claudia M. Buch. She is an economist who currently serves as Vice President of the Bundesbank. They're going to take a deep dive with us into the economy of Germany and the Euro area. Foremost, we are going to look into Germany's energy sector, transportation, and finally industry from the green perspective. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's start right off. The economy is measured by the three main economic indicators: GDP, gross domestic product, unemployment, and finally inflation. First of all, I would like to ask our professor about GDP in the Euro area and in Germany.
Firstly, I would like to say that I am so delighted to be here. In 2019, the Euro area and Germany GDP remained at a stable and healthy level. In 2020, however, COVID-19 restrictions hit manufacturers hard, so supply chain bottlenecks and a lack of supplies slowed the economy into a recession. The effects of these shortages were felt particularly in Germany, since over a quarter of their economy is based on industry. In 2021, the economic performance slowly began to increase again and spiked for both the Euro area and Germany. However, it fell slightly at the end of this year as another wave of pandemic restrictions came.
Thank you so much for your input, Professor. Ms. Bentley, could you tell us about unemployment in the Euro area and in Germany, please?
Yes, thank you. Unemployment was better dealt with during the COVID-19 pandemic because of the experience the EU has gained through past crises, such as the 2008 financial debt crisis. Thus, the EU was prepared for pandemic unemployment. For example, the Coronavirus Response Investment Initiative was instated. As a result of these initiatives, unemployment decreased from 8.1% in March 2021 to 6.2% in February 2022. Throughout the pandemic, unemployment in Germany has decreased as well. As of January 2022, Germany has a 3.1% unemployment rate, down from 3.8% in March 2021. There are many reasons associated with the decreasing rate. For instance, throughout the pandemic, the government had allowed payroll benefits to rise from 60 to 80%.
Thank you very much for your information, Ms. Bentley. For our last economic indicator, inflation, Ms. Baerbock, could you please update us with the latest information?
For sure. For the most part, inflation in the Euro area progressed on an upwards trend, except for a mini downfall in July and a major downfall in January. In March, inflation rose to 7.8%, which is higher than the predicted 7.5% for that month, as the price of natural gas and oil rose after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has pushed inflation in many countries to the highest levels seen in over 40 years. Thus, the energy sector experienced the most inflation. For Germany in specific, their peak was reached in November, going to 6%, which has now led us to the 7.6% we see in March.
Thank you all so much for this information. Now that we have seen how Germany's economy is doing, we can start tackling the challenges of the industry, energy, and transport sector's dependence on fossil fuels.
Yes, according to the Clean Energy Wire in 2021, our number one energy source was oil, also referred to as petroleum. It accounted for the largest total energy consumption, followed by natural gas, then coal. As you can see, the three fossil fuels dominate with over 70% of our energy resources. However, with this new coalition formed between my Green Party and the Social Democratic Party, we know that the climate crisis is our top priority at the moment. In fact, we've actually advanced some of our goals. For instance, we've moved to eliminate the use of coal by the year 2030, along with making our energy sector more independent on an international scale.
Independence, particularly due to the conflict in Ukraine, would be a necessity to meet any goal at the moment. We are so dependent on Russian natural gas.
I agree. In the first quarter of 2022, we imported approximately 40% of our natural gas from Russia.
This dependence is comparable to that of the EU. They imported approximately 45% of all of their total natural gas from Russia in 2021.
Yes, and with the current conflict in Ukraine, the risk of their natural gas supply being shut off is quite real.
Not only is there a risk of lack of supply, but there are several environmental risks of natural gas as well. As a whole, natural gas may sound very good and natural, but in reality it is quite harmful to the environment. It is a non-renewable energy resource.
And 22 million German families rely on this natural gas.
Not to mention that it is a large factor in our economy, since it is one of the key power resources behind many of our industries. According to Deutsche Bundesbank, Germany's GDP would decrease by 1% if its energy resources were to be cut off from the Russian supply.
The risk of recession due to this impending gas crisis is clearly looming overhead, and the aforementioned rise in energy prices is also making this natural gas very expensive for consumers.
Not only are we suffering the possibility of a lack of supply as well as crushing prices, but we are indirectly supporting Russia's military through our purchase of this gas.
Also, Germany is the world's fourth largest consumer of coal and has lagged far behind its Western European neighbors in the process of phasing it out. Now, how does the industry sector get affected by all of this?
Ms. Baerbock, your government coalition clearly wants to go green, but Germany's industries are relying on coal. It is a key factor in electricity production. In 2021, hard coal accounted for 9% of Germany's main energy consumption, the majority of which was being used to generate electricity.
Yes, this is true. Germany imported all of their hard coal in 2020, totaling 31.8 million tons. Our top three suppliers in 2019 were Russia, the United States, and Australia.
Clearly, the majority of Germany's coal comes from Russia. However, due to the conflict in Ukraine, access to this resource has been limited, and this is harming German industries.
Now we can discuss Germany's #1 energy import, oil, consumed primarily in the transportation sector. Let us start off with an overview of what we are dealing with.
In this past year, the transport sector has emitted around 148 million tons of CO2. This means that emissions from this sector are 1.2% above the 2020 amount and is around 3 million tons above the annual emissions level permitted by the Climate Action Law for 2021.
The reasoning behind this is that road freight traffic numbers have increased, particularly on highways, whereas passenger car traffic has decreased, specifically over the course of the pandemic.
Clearly, one of the biggest issues with the transport sector is the CO2 emissions that it causes. However, I would argue that the second greatest issue is Germany's reliance on oil.
Yes, in 2021, Germany imported over 80 million tons of oil. It also imported the most Russian oil of any EU country.
In the end, dependence is still strong, which relates back to the high number of emissions being let out, and therefore, climate change.
Now that we have discussed these three challenges that Germany faces, we can start discussing some viable solutions, starting with their dependency on coal. Ms. Baerbock, your traffic light coalition insisted on making the expansion of renewable energy crucial in your radical green plans. What does this mean in terms of concrete goals and deadlines?
According to the coalition, renewable energy will account for 80% of Germany's power output by the year 2030. For Germany to achieve this, we must increase our wind and solar capacities.
Clearly, the government seems to believe that renewables will be able to take the place of other fossil fuels. But isn't it difficult to calculate when wind and sun would produce enough power?
Germany can forecast precisely when and how the wind and solar power will shine, and when it will do so. Today, the wind data is almost 100% accurate. However, solar data is harder to forecast. Its accuracy is between 93 to 95%.
These renewables seem to be a viable solution for the future, but right now, due to limited infrastructure, coal is still so widely used and still pollutes over 15 billion tons of CO2 each year.
One solution to this would be carbon capture, which captures the CO2 emissions produced by burning coal. Despite its high price, it is still cheaper than some renewables, such as solar energy.
And what is this carbon capture? Ms. Baerbock, would you mind giving us an explanation?
CCS is a method used to store CO2 emissions in the ground and stop them from entering the atmosphere while coal is being burnt. Typically, 90% of CCS operations are successful.
Continuing the use of renewables will make us less dependent on coal, and carbon capture can temporarily stop coal pollution until a greener solution is put in place to properly phase out coal.
Obviously, the most challenging is Germany's reliance on gas, especially Russian gas. Like the rest of Europe, it is highly reliant on gas in its industry and for heating, a sector which makes up 12% of the EU's carbon dioxide emissions. How is Germany scheduling to cut back on gas radically?
Well, our government coalition agreement states that all newly installed heating systems must be operated with at least 65% renewable energy by the year 2025, although they are unsure how fast buildings will be able to replace their systems.
In my opinion, Ms. Baerbock, stronger measures are needed. It is clear that something will have to replace natural gas, as it plays such a crucial role in Germany's economy.
Biomass has a great potential, and it will be the largest chunk of renewables in Germany produced from waste products. It mostly produces heat, gas, and gaseous liquids directly. Over half of German renewable energy is fueled by biomass, as it can heat homes and has industrial use, just as natural gas does. Are there any other sources that could replace natural gas?
Yes, green hydrogen can be produced with renewable electricity from water through a process called electrolysis, with only oxygen being emitted. If hydrogen replaced natural gas, the equivalent to CO2 emissions from 2.5 million cars would be completely eliminated.
This is why investment in the future of green hydrogen is key. Already, the German government has invested over 9 billion euros in this project. By continuing to invest in and implement hydrogen infrastructure, it will become more and more viable and affordable in the long term.
I hate to disagree with you, Professor, but wouldn't green hydrogen harm industries? And doesn't it need renewable electricity to be viable?
Actually, Ms. Bentelli, hydrogen is very similar to natural gas in that it can be transported through pipelines. Thus, the infrastructure seems to be very similar between the two. Renewable energy still would need to be encouraged in order to produce green hydrogen, though.
So, as Germany incrementally phases out natural gas, investment in biomass will allow greener resources to take its place. Green hydrogen also seems to be a viable future solution as we continue to invest in it. Now we can focus on the transport sector and its dependence on oil. Electric car demand just recently picked up. The government goal of having 1 million electric and plug-in hybrid cars was achieved 6 months after the Plan 2020.
To continue to encourage the use of electric vehicles, the solution is the e-car bonus program. So far, this program has only encouraged the use of hybrid and electric vehicles. However, after 2022, only fully electric vehicles will be encouraged and promoted.
That is a step in the right direction. Trains are also the greenest form and sustainable form of transportation. How is Germany and Deutsche Bahn promoting a shift from road to rail?
Deutsche Bahn has been creating green options and has implemented more than 150 environmental measures to make their railways more green. Their goal is to be CO2-free by 2050 and cut CO2 emissions by more than 50% by 2030.
These decisions will not just affect Germany, but Europe as a whole, as Germany is Europe's largest economy and the 4th largest in the world.
I think that we can all agree that a viable policy would include supporting electric cars and green train infrastructure for our dependency on oil.
Dankeschön und auf Wiedersehen.
Welcome everyone to today's Assembly of Parliament. Mr. President, Ms. Prime Minister, thank you for your time. Today we have proposals from our members of Parliament who would like to present our concerns for the future of Lithuania's economy. Representative Reeves, Lalonde, and I have created a report on the social mobility, inequality, and the gender pay gap in Lithuania. Representative Reeves, please tell us about the current state of the EU economy.
Thank you, Representative McGilvray. The EU area economic situation is an important one to discuss because it directly influences cause and consequence within Lithuania. One key aspect is the multi-annual financial framework for 2021 to 2027. This accounts for 2.018 trillion euros, and this includes the Next Generation EU funds, which is a fund put in place to support member states during the COVID-19 crisis. This money will be spent on humanitarian aid, EU for health, etc. But one key aspect that we need to focus on is digitizing. This will provide digital identities, smarter and efficient cities, and AI for educational, transportation, and healthcare purposes. Some of the key sectors within the EU area. So to begin, we have the service sector, which accounts for 73.7% of GDP. There's also a capital market union initiative in place. As well, we have the agricultural sector, which accounts for 1.7% of GDP. There is a subsidized program called the Common Agricultural Policy as well, although it is undergoing massive reforms. Finally, we have the industry and tourism sector, which accounts for 24.6% of GDP, although this was hit hardest by COVID-19, with a 44% decline in tourist arrivals compared to 2019. I would now like to pass it to Representative Lalonde for further discussion on the political and historical context.
Thank you, Representative Reeves. Understanding the current and former political and social climate of the country is pertinent to understanding its economic situation. Since Lithuania's independence from the Soviet Union in 1990, the country has been democratic. As of 2004, Lithuania became a member country of both the European Union and NATO. Lithuania's economy grew 500% after gaining independence in 1990, though socioeconomics are still a struggle in Lithuania. Large groups of the population face discrimination and poverty remains widespread but shallow. Representative Reeves, can you give our Prime Minister and President an overview of the GDP in the EU?
Thank you, Representative Lalonde. GDP in the EU is relatively high. In 2020, it stood at 15,000 billion USD, second highest behind the United States of America. Its annual growth rate stood at 4.6 in December 2021. One key factor that we have to consider when talking about GDP is gender pay inequalities, because this factors into productivity gain and GDP overall output. However, if resolved by 2050, a major increase in economic output would be seen in EU GDP per capita, roughly 6.1 to 9.6% increase. This translates roughly to around 3 trillion euros at the highest. Specifically on Lithuania, the GDP annual growth rate peaked in July 2021 at 8.3%, falling by 3.9% to 4.4% in February 2022. The keys to their economic success was their introduction to the World Trade Organization in 2001 and the EU in 2004. I would now like to pass it to Representative Lalonde for unemployment.
Lithuania has had a long history of unemployment, from life under the Soviet regime to COVID-19. After Lithuania's emancipation in 1990, the unemployment rate rose from 13.39% to 16.84% in 2001. In 2002, the unemployment rate began a steady decline, until the global financial crisis in 2008. Since the global financial crisis, unemployment rates have steadily decreased, with the exception of a rise in 2020 due to COVID. What are the causes of unemployment in Lithuania? Well, many marginalized groups face discrimination in employment. Additionally, one of Lithuania's largest industries, tourism, took a hit in recent years due to COVID-19. In 2021, unemployment in Lithuania hit its pandemic peak and has since been steadily recovering as of 2022. Representative McGilvray will now go over inflation.
Certainly. Lithuania's inflation rate has been skyrocketing in the last year due to the effects of the pandemic. 2 months ago, Lithuania's inflation rate increased to 15.7%, a record high since 1994 when the inflation rate hit 45% due to Lithuania's separation from the Soviet Union. The rise in inflation was driven by higher prices for housing, water, electricity, gas, and other fuel goods and services. A lot of these main causes of inflation can be blamed on the Western and European countries refusing to buy Russian resources. All sectors of the economy will have to push up the consumer price inflation because of this. Even the average price of food in Lithuania at shops has increased by 3.87 euros compared to just 3 months ago in February. The Phillips curve, as seen above me, also reveals that since the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Lithuania's inflation rate has only been increasing and therefore unemployment will continue to steadily decline. Now let's take a deeper look at 3 of Lithuania's economic issues. Representative Reeves, Tell us about inequality in Lithuania.
Thank you, Representative McGilvray. Lithuania has one of the largest inequitable income problems within the EU, thus it requires extensive reforms to change. The Gini coefficient of equivalized disposable income is a tool used to measure the degree of difference in a set of values, which is commonly inequality. Lithuania stood at 35.1% in 2020. And it maintained itself steadily since 2016 with a slight trend downwards over the last 4 years. If we compare that to Slovakia, which is on the lower end of the Gini coefficient scale, there was a 14.2% negative difference. For reference, 0 is perfectly balanced equality on the scale, and 1 is perfectly balanced inequality. One major flaw with the Gini coefficient system, however, is that it looks at the middle of the distribution and not the tail ends where most of the inequality lies. I would now like to pass it to Representative Lalonde.
Thank you, Representative Reeves. Social mobility is defined as the movement of people between social or economic groups for different reasons. Social mobility is generally lower in countries with high levels of inequality, i.e., the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. As of 2019, 21.9% of the population lives below the poverty line, making less than 4,000 euros a year. However, 26.3% of the population is at risk of social exclusion or poverty. In Lithuania, there are large numbers of moderate poverty and few numbers of extreme poverty. Two of the biggest issues preventing upward social mobility are lack of education and discrimination against minorities. According to the Global Social Mobility Report of 2020, Lithuania was ranked 26th out of 82 countries surveyed. The report bases its scores on the following. How much of breaking intergenerational poverty, gaining higher education than one's parents, how much a family may move through economic classes through generations, and how much of a person's income and education level are based on their parents. Intergenerational poverty stemming from the Soviet regime prevents minorities especially from making more money. On the topic of intergenerational trauma, allow me to point out that Lithuania has the highest alcohol consumption per capita out of every EU country. Many former Soviet states fell into an alcohol epidemic after the fall of the Soviet Union. This is relevant because an academic article by Carol L. Hart concluded that the majority of men who experienced downward social mobility were classed as binge drinkers. For these reasons, even though Lithuania has one of the fastest growing European economies, without higher levels of social mobility, particularly amongst minorities, economic inequality and the pay gap will grow. Representative McGilvray, can you please explain the gender pay gap in Lithuania?
Thank you. Today, Lithuania sits in the bottom 10 of the Gender Equality Index in the EU. In 2015, Lithuania displayed one of the highest levels of income inequality across the European Union. The gender pay gap stood at 14.3%. In 2019, women on average made 16.6% less than men. But why is it so high? Three major factors contributing to the gender pay gap are female-dominated professions like education and social care, typically paying much less than male-dominated professions in the private sector. The second factor is labor market segregation. The distribution is completely uneven. The higher the position, the lower the number of women. The third factor contributing to gender pay gap is that women never ask for equal pay because they don't know they're being discriminated against. Companies did not disclose men's salaries to women until April 2021. Companies did not disclose until April 2021. Women were completely unaware of the income inequality they were facing. Industries kept salaries of their employees a secret from the public. In order to address the issue, it was made mandatory for Lithuania's firms to separate average employee salary data into male and female components to reveal the underlying discrimination. Due to a lot of the discriminatory income equality in Lithuania, women have to suffer major consequences such as the pension gap, increased poverty, and greater reliance on social programs. Representative Reeves, Lalonde, and I propose a solution to tackle all three issues. Let's begin with Representative Reeves. How will our solution affect inequality?
Thank you, Representative McGilvray. To start, we would like to tackle social mobility and inequality. To create upward social mobility, what we need to focus on is the cause of, or lack of social mobility. To create an upward social movement, we need to start by focusing on creating opportunity and providing support, especially to marginalized groups. The solution that we want to implement is free education, especially in post-secondary schools, and vocational training. To do this, we will raise income tax brackets within Lithuania by 5%. So the 20% bracket would become 25 and the 32% bracket would become 37%. This is still lower income tax than most EU countries. The government will then distribute this extra money to municipalities depending on their per capita. Now I would like to pass it to Representative Lalonde.
Thank you. Other changes to education include abolishing private primary and secondary schools. Finland is a country that has prohibited private education at these levels. It means that children are interacting with peers of different classes, religion, races, etc. Inclusivity will also be taught to students as well, through subjects like Pride Month and Black History Month. Students will also be equipped with the skills and knowledge related to new and in-demand career fields, such as typing skills, English, and coding courses. Skills that are huge selling points for employers and governmental organizations. The last education-related topic of our policy is alcohol awareness. Early education about safe alcohol consumption should be mandatory and comprehensive in schools. This will help combat alcoholism in new generations. The great part about adding inclusive, diverse education is that it's relatively cheap to implement, if not free to implement. One of the few costs we could foresee are paying for educational materials like books with new, diverse, and inclusive curriculum. Lastly, we would like to create free and or subsidized alcohol rehabilitation programs for people of all ages. These programs would be heavily advertised to raise awareness. Now to Representative McGilvery for the solution on the gender pay gap.
Thank you, Representative Lalonde. To close the gender pay gap, Lithuania needs to begin by auditing salary data. Regular audits are often censored and data can be changed. For Lithuania to make a change, we need complete pay transparency. The audit needs to be advertised wherever possible. News needs to address the audit. Lithuania has to make sure as many people hear the pay gap as possible, because it without a doubt exists. Another aspect of this is introducing an equal pay day in Lithuania to raise awareness and ignite action to close the pay gap. Next, leave arrangements, flexible leave arrangements and affordable childcare need to be introduced. Because women who choose to have kids have to face obstacles in advancing their careers when balancing work and family with all which can harm opportunities. Making affordable childcare will also grow the economy, promote gender equality, increase women's labor force participation, which will in turn help contribute to closing the gender pay gap. Another important policy we believe will help is raising the minimum wage. Differences between men and women's occupations can account for nearly half of the gender pay gap. Raising the minimum wage will help single mothers and hardworking women support their families. The minimum wage will have to keep up with the rate of inflation until it is the level of a living wage for all people in Lithuania. Now on to Representative Lalonde for our concluding statement.
Ms. Prime Minister, Mr. President, we collectively and firmly believe meeting the goals of these policies to combat the growing issues of social mobility, the gender pay gap, and inequality will provide Lithuania with long-term economic growth and prosperity. Thank you for your time.